Welcome to Biblically Lit, conversations that illuminate Scripture and ignite faith. I'm your host, MindiJoFurby, author and founder of Kingswind Books. Hi friends, thank you so much for being here. I have been looking forward to this episode ever since we recorded Makaela's story. Time didn't allow us to flesh it out too much last time, but that's what we're going to do today. We are going to go deeper in some areas and tackle some topics that we didn't have the chance to wrestle with previously. And on that note, if you have not listened to Makaela's story, please do that first. This is all going to make a lot more sense if you listen to that first. Her first episode is number 42, and it is so powerful. I experienced so many emotions listening to it, and one of the reasons that we're doing this episode is to kind of help guide those emotions to Christ and then let Him move the pieces in the way that brings glory to Him and then further sanctification to us. So let's dig in. Thank you so much, Makaela, for taking the time to come back and share more of your story and then how God is using it in your life.
Well, thank you so much for having me back. I have to say, I was shocked by the first time sitting on there and talking and just being able to speak was really helpful and healing to myself too. So thank you for having me and having me back.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that because I know there are a lot of nerves. So
There's still a lot of nerves.
So a lot of nerves, but I'm so glad that God just met us where we were and that He has used it so powerfully. Already we've been getting so much feedback like we were just talking about, and it's always so wonderful to step out in faith, even though we're terrified, and God to meet us where we're at and confirm that it was definitely the right thing to do. So I am beyond thankful for everything that He's doing, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation tonight. So let's start. The first kind of topic that I had in mind was I was taking notes furiously last time. And one of the things that really stood out to me was when you talked about confidence and how you right now is like kind of the first time that you are experiencing confidence in who you are, really solidly in your relationship with the Lord. And then obviously, prior to that, it was the opposite, right? You had such a lack of confidence, especially in this valley. And so I just want to flesh that out a little bit. You were immersed in tons of confusion amidst abuse and all of this stuff. And then you experienced freedom obviously physical freedom. But then that was always of course, grounded in Christ and instead of, circumstantial relationships and all this other stuff. So I want you to just take it away. Talk about confidence and then take it however you want. I would love to just know kind of what it was to lack that confidence before, and then what your favorite part is of finally knowing who you are and how He's crafted this beautiful masterpiece, even in the midst of such great pain.
All right. Well, thank you. Okay. Well, I will start with this. If you could actually hear my heartbeat, because I can feel it pounding out of my chest. I get really nervous because this is honestly the first time second time speaking. And I have to say this topic for this second session is a little bit more difficult for me in the preparing part because it's even more personal, where you would think that first session that we did was enough.
Right.
It was. But then we're getting down to like the nitty gritty of the heart and what can literally destroy a person.
Right.
So talking about these details, it was really helpful to sit here and put it on, in pen in my notebook. There was one night, Lily, my daughter, wanted to go to a football game, and I sat up on the hill by myself. She ran around with her friends, and I was just writing like crazy. So it was really good to just flesh this stuff out and put it down on paper. Not that I've not done that before. I've tried to write so many times before, but it's just so hard because you just get tunnel visioned in one area here and there. So
right. Really well, and it's not a linear story either, right? I mean, there's so many different aspects to this, and it's not healing is not a linear process. It's not chronological. It's not like you go through, here's, point A, point B, point, like that's not how it works. Yeah. And so there's just so much to work through. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's aspects of like healing from church, healing from, in your personal relationship with God and your beliefs. And then there's healing with friendship. You're right. It's all over the place. It has so many different aspects in healing. And it would be nice if it would just say, okay, step 1 to healing is going to be this process. And it's not like that. No. Like grief is not like that either. Grief hits you at the most unexplainable times, and you just fall apart in grief, and then you're like, okay, back to life. Right. And it's okay. So that's just part of that healing process. I always feel like that statement of grief is just evidence that you really cared and you really loved. And so I welcome those moments when they come. But okay, we'll get started. Talking about confidence, who I am today, I am night and day than from who I was when 6 years ago, when everything happened. I'm night and day from who I was. Obviously, all of us are from when we were young. A lot of growth happens in our 20s, and in our 30s, we start to get a little bit more level-headed and more direction in our life. 40s, you feel like, okay, I gotta know a little bit more about who I am. I'm not really worried about other people anymore. But then you throw in all of life's circumstances, so that can really wreck a person. Which is what it did to me. So, but during my marriage, I will say I am not a different person today. I'm a completely different, more confident, understanding, patient person than I was when I was married, for sure. Okay, so I'm gonna start with having a lack of confidence, insecurity, and what that looked like for me. And just so I shared a lot in the last session, and then. So I'm just going to pick up to the point where what it did to me. So a little disclaimer here. I am going to share about the effects of one of the women's relationship with my husband and how it affected me, because that is rooted and it's evidence in the dreams that I still have, the nightmares I have. So 6 years later, and I still have the same nightmare, just different setting, but same thing that happens. And that is very, very much evident that this relationship between my husband and this woman is what really tore apart my own confidence and worth. And so that's where I'm going to start. So there was a time that my husband was in the relationship with this woman who, I mentioned this in the first podcast, was his spiritual wife. He had convinced her, she was feeling guilty about having an affair. He convinced her that if they became spiritual husband and wife, then they would be right before God. So they took vows in his office, and they became this imaginary spiritual husband and wife. That was very close to the very beginning of their relationship. So 4 years was the length of their relationship, and she was around our family constantly. She's a mom. She's married, still married. And I hope the best for their family. I really do. Right. So they're still married, but she was married at the time, and her husband traveled a lot for work, and she was lonely, and she had her own issues that she had to work through, which is why she went to counseling in the first place. I think the mistake, hindsight, she shouldn't have gone to the church for the counseling, that initial reaching out, but then she should have been directed to a licensed professional counselor who could have helped her even more so. It would have saved a lot of strain and suffering and for her own life. But that's not what happened. So she really believed that she was his wife and that I was not.
Oh, wow. So she thought that becoming his spiritual wife somehow negated y'all's marriage?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. And she had said something a lot. I didn't get too much in the details of what the women said when they've she is specifically asked to talk about things more, but I couldn't do it because I was having a lot of heart issues at the time when she was asking.
Understandable.
And blackouts in my heart. Yeah. Anyways, it was not a level of stress that I add to my life. So, and quite honestly, I just didn't need to hear anymore. I'd heard enough, and I could not. My body was physically telling me, you cannot take on any more stress.
No. Yeah. And we have a limit. We absolutely have a limit. And you have to, absolutely.
Yeah. So, so what I would learn is that he was telling her that I was just a roommate to him, and we weren't together, and that I didn't love him and he didn't love me, and whatever the lies are. That's the extent of what I know he told her, because like I said, I don't need to know anymore. The evidence was enough.
Right.
So anyhow, she was around constantly. And I felt like there was this one point in the relationship where I felt like she was trying to become me. And I know that sounds weird, but I will say this, like, women have really good discernment for the most part. Most women have really good discernment, intuition and discernment. And usually we're pretty spot on that stuff. Yeah. A woman's intuition is pretty darn close to, not perfect, but we're pretty good at it. So it's just this moment where I just felt like over the course of time, it felt like, I think she's trying to become me, and I don't know what to do with this. And it was just because she was around so much, and all the things that were happening within that. So it first started right after the relationship started. She would come to the house at all hours, early in the morning, late at night. At the time, we had a garden at our house. It was a really large garden. We had that garden probably 3 of the 4 years that they were together. And at one point, she expressed to him that she wanted to have a garden too. So our garden was such a special place for me. And especially at the beginning when we were tilling the garden and putting the plants in, planting them. And it was just really special, not just for me, but it felt like it was special for both myself and my husband in our marriage. In some way, working that garden together opened up moments for us to start talking. Or at least it did for me.
Right.
It put me back into the land, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I grew up in nature. I grew up at the base of the mountains in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was always outside growing up. So I loved being in the dirt. I was a tomboy. Loved being in the dirt. I loved hiking. I loved climbing. I'd ride my bike in the mountains. Loved climbing rocks, running in the mountains. But then when I moved to Virginia and I met him, that all stopped. There was one point after we were married that I expressed my interest in the outdoors. We'd gone on like some youth group trip. And it was obviously this camp, and I just was in heaven because that was what I loved up in the mountains. And so I expressed my interest in the outdoors and just how I missed it. And he made this statement to me that has always stood out to me, and in some way it has made me pause. And he said, you would live in the mountains forever if you could, wouldn't you? And I paused because it's like the first year of marriage. And so I'm like, yeah, like I paused because it was true. And I wondered that moment, I wonder if I'm ever going to get back to nature, and I wonder if nature's ever going to get back to me. So, like just growing up, not just living in Albuquerque, but my senior year of my high school, the summer of my senior year, I worked for an asthma camp for kids with asthma.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it was really cool. Probably one of the most fun, interesting camps I worked at. But the camp was down south in South New Mexico, somewhere near the mountains of Cloudcroft. And it just became the perfect job for a summer job. It was kids caring and the great outdoors, and I just was in heaven. So I really knew that being in nature was a part of me when I wanted to wake up at 6 a.m. and go run in the mountains. So here I was in the first couple of years of marriage, and I had yet to step foot in our mountains here. So we're at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. It's 30-45 minutes away just to go hiking. It's not far at all. But I had yet to step foot. And so I'd been out here for 4 years by that point, by the time I got married, and I had not done it. I dated him in college for 2 years. And, that's just life. We were athletes in college. And, different things. But then when we got married and we kind of got into life, it was like, let's go camping, let's go fishing, let's go do these things. And he just wasn't into it. So the closest thing I think we did for the outdoors was we did picnics
at
the pizza butter, which are fun, but it's not the same.
No.
So we got a little bit of taste of the nature out there. But I didn't really speak up because honestly, I just felt like, well, he's more into sports and, the outdoors just isn't his thing. It's just something that I just didn't think of. So when we did have our garden, and gardening and hiking and being in nature is not the same thing, but you are in the dirt, your hands are in the dirt, and there's so many nutrients in the dirt. Like, it's really healthy to get your hands in the dirt because the nutrients that are in there actually help with your mental health. They help with depression and your anxiety, just what the nutrients are in there. So I loved having my hands back in the dirt. So the garden became a very safe space for me. It was an outlet away from the church. Our lives were consumed with the church, as being a pastor and pastor's wife, or, if you've been in ministry 1 minute, that church can consume your life.
Yep.
Right? Your whole life can be consumed by it. It's just wrapped around serving the church. Even if you're not in ministry and you're just a volunteer, because especially at a smaller church, and we would always have the same volunteers over and over because you would know these are the people that will show up. But they get tired too.
Right.
But it's so easy for people. And then in a sense, the church becomes an idol. When, God tells us don't put any idols before me, but even the church can become an idol.
Yeah.
So anyhow, growing a garden became the one place that I could truly be alone. Like, I could go home. I could just turn my brain off, go out in the garden, and some days I would just go sit. I would just sit on the ground, or I'd take a stool out there and I'd just sit out there. And I wouldn't do nothing. I wouldn't have music. I wouldn't be reading a book. I just sit because I just wanted to breathe that air, and it was just peaceful. So it was my safe space. And I loved being able to go to my home away from the church because we were always around people. Just the nature of being in ministry again. And it was just quiet. So it was a good place for me to process my thoughts too. So when his spiritual wife wanted to join us in gardening, I had a problem with that. I didn't have a problem that she wanted to do a garden. That's great. That's awesome.
Go for it. Yeah.
And let's we'll bounce ideas off each other, but just do it at your own home.
Right.
So I had a problem, and a big reason is because I put so much effort into that garden, and that space became so important to me, not just because of my own time, but because I felt like my husband and I were talking in there. Like, we'd go out, we get our hands dirty, we'd be planting, we'd be working together, and then we'd have deeper conversations than normal. And so maybe you're asking, like, what is the big deal? She wanted a garden. Why didn't she just do it at her house? Well, she didn't do it at her house.
Oh my word.
She did it at our house. So
she was your friend, right? Like, so she was in all of this. Like, I know what was going on between them, but like, as far as you knew, I mean, apart from your intuition, which was spot on, but she's still just, technically she's just a friend.
She's just a friend. And it's funny you asked that, because as I was like prepping my mind for this, and again, this is not about her. This is about like what the interactions and the actions and words that were said and done, how it destroyed me.
Right. Yeah.
As a person.
Right.
My identity and confidence just stripped me a little bit over time. And that's how abuse is. It's just a tiny little chisel here and there, sometimes massive chunks, sometimes just chiseling away of who the person is. It's funny that you asked that, because I was thinking about this and that very thought. And so when their affair started, he he told her to become friends with me. And, as a pastor's wife, you just don't know who to trust. Yeah. And really any minister, any person in ministry, you just don't know who to trust, but especially those who are in pastoral leadership. It's very hard because you can't just, you want to have good friends, but you don't want to air out all your dirty laundry, and you don't want to air out all the hardships, because people are humans. We all make mistakes. If his, I'm not, like justifying levels of abuse, of affairs, but if he had said, I really messed up, if he had come to me and was like, I really messed up, I had this affair with this person and I'm sorry what I, then I don't know if I would have stayed with him still, but I could have heard him out a little bit different.
Right.
It would have looked different of the processing it. But I didn't choose her to be my friend. It wasn't, our kids were the same age, and it just kind of, we were acquaintances at church. We were, I would call her a friend, yes, but not like a close friend. And then all of a sudden she was around all the time. And
a pastor's wife, especially, I feel like it would be very difficult to like not reciprocate someone's friendship, because you're like, well, that, I like you, and I don't really want to be super close. But then if someone's making that effort, especially as a pastor's wife, it must have been like, well, I can't like say no, like I can't, I don't know. There's just I guess that extra layer of pressure. Yes.
And I'm the type of person too, where I really don't like confrontation, and I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Definitely a people pleaser, or I was. But there's also a limit to that, where if I can sense that something's off and it's making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up every time I see that person or hear something, then I'm going to put some boundaries in.
Right.
Until I can figure out what's going on.
Of course.
That's just how I am. I have to have my space until I can figure out what's going on. But anyways, so according to that time, she was just a friend coming around, and our kids were the same age, and they were playing together, and it was nice to have a friend come around, like, oh, she's a good friend. You should be a good friend. You guys should be good friends. And I think at one point it's funny because I didn't think about this till this very moment, and just talking about how did that friendship start. I used to clean the church. She did it as well. But I used to clean the church, like half the church anyways. And I was leaving church one day, and she was driving towards me. We were the only two in the parking lot. And she rolled her window down. She was like, hey, how's it going? Blah, 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 whatever. Right. And she asked me how I felt about the first woman. That was his first affair. And what I thought about her relationship with Jason and how weird it was.
What?
And I was like, yeah. And it was like, in a sense, it kind of confirmed for me, like, okay, somebody else picked up on it.
Huh.
So that kind of like made me feel like, okay, well, someone sees what I'm seeing. I'm not so crazy and feeling like that. What I didn't know is he probably told her, like, tell Makaela about this. Like, that would be a good connection point. I don't know. I don't have proof in that, but that conversation did happen. And so from there, it was like, okay, well, she gets it. She sees it. She kind of identifies with what I'm saying. I don't have to explain it too much. I don't even have to go into detail because she picked up on it. It's not me saying it. So it kind of let a guard down there for me to be a little bit more of what quote unquote friends. But honestly, I had question marks with her the whole time. There were flags the whole time from the beginning. So going back to the garden, I put a lot of work into that garden. Right. And with him, we both worked really hard to till it and get it ready. And it was a massive garden. It was like 30 yards by 15 yards wide. It was really big. And his job was to till it, and he loved it because he had the tiller, and it was so fun running the tiller. And my job was to pick up every rock, stone, and pebble from the dirt, because he said no rocks could be in the dirt. They won't grow if the rocks are in the dirt. So there was probably four wheelbarrows full of stones and little pebbles, and I just did it myself. And I was on my hands and knees, literally sifting through dirt to find rocks that you couldn't even see, but he said they were in there. Wow. So I had to do that. And then there were days where he would call, and after the garden was growing, and he would call on his way home, and he'd say, I'm on the way home. I need you to go out to the garden, and I need you to pick all the weeds before I get home so that I can put the fertilizer on the base of the plants. And not like a bad idea to pick weeds, but it's a 30 by 15 yard garden. Right. A lot of weeds. And so I'd go out there, and I'd be like, because I knew he'd be mad if I didn't, or he would blame me if something did, it would be my fault if I didn't do it. So I went out there and I did it. And again, didn't have a voice at that time. I didn't use my voice. I was very, just fearful. So I didn't. So we always joke, my dad and I always joke, my dad will be like, he'll call sometimes like if he's visiting or if I'm visiting them, and he'll be like, hey, I'm on my way home. Can you please make sure you get the weeds out of the garden? So we just joke about it because it's so stupid. But
just real quick,
I put a lot of work into that garden, in other words. But like we said in the last episode, that there are things that are good that God does, that God uses the good, can turn bad things into good.
Yeah.
Can turn it to good. And so here's a positive from that. With the amount of weeds that I had to pull, there were so many spiritual revelations happening in that garden that the Lord, I would just sit there and I'd be angry because I'd be like, I don't want to be out here in this heat pulling weeds. What in the world? Why isn't he doing this with me? And then some days I would sit there and I'd be like, okay. So case in point, if you've seen a green bean plant, so I'm in there one day and I'm like picking the beans and I'm pulling weeds and I see this one weed and I'm like, is that a weed or is that the plant? I don't want to actually.
This is my issue. Yes.
Yeah. Is that a weed or is that a plant? Okay.
Yes.
So here's the spiritual side of it, right? It's like, so here's the positive. That day in particular, when I was like, is this a weed or is this the green bean plant? I could not tell. And was it green beans? Maybe it was the peas. Could have been the peas. It's been a while now since I've been in it might have been the peas actually. Anyhow, the weed looked just like the plant, just like it. That's why I was like, I don't know if it is or not. It was right there at the root. But then I pulled it long and there was nothing on it. So no seed that came from it, nothing that came from it, no bean. I was an imposter. And here's the lesson that I pulled from that. We do have to pull the weeds from our life. We need to get the things that are in our life that are not supposed to be there, because those weeds, the things that are not supposed to be in our lives, are sucking the nutrients we need to survive. So in order for us to grow, we don't need to have imposters in our life. We don't need to have these weeds in our life. And that weeds might be something different for every person. It might be an inappropriate relationship. It might be negativity, you name it. But getting that out, it might be another person in your life that's just really negative and pulls you down, and there's nothing positive about it. And you're just like, I don't know why this person's in my life. I don't know why I keep going with this friendship. It's not healthy. It's sucking out the nutrients you need to grow. So in that moment, I had that revelation of like, this woman's an imposter in my life. And so there were good moments in there too when I was gardening. So that's why the garden really meant a lot to me. So anyways, he offered her a corner of the garden so she could be a part of it with us and not have to do it at her house alone. And so there were mornings that I'd wake up and she would be at our house in the garden and she'd have coffee for both me and my husband. And she had her own family, but they wouldn't be with her. She'd be out there by herself, or she'd come over late at night in her pajamas. And she said she didn't like being at her home, and she just didn't want to be there anymore. So this is the garden, my home. It was no longer my home, no longer my space.
Right.
And, one day she brought us coffee, and, by my knowledge, she was uninvited. And it was early in the morning. And I got to a point where I told her, she was like, I just brought you guys coffee. And I was like, but we have coffee in the house. Right. And I was trying to be nice without saying it, but it was happening so much and I was getting really frustrated. That finally I got to this point where I was just like straightforward. And I was like, we don't want your coffee. I'm not trying to be mean, but we don't need it. You don't need to come into our house all the time. And you don't need to be here in the mornings and late at night. And she was holding the coffee. She goes, Kayla, this is what friends do for each other. And I was like, and I said, well, this friend doesn't want it. I was like, I'm not I'm not a mean person, but it came out. And I was just like, I don't want it. And she was like, oh, okay. So
quick question. How far did she live away from you guys?
10 minutes. Just right down the road, not far.
But still not close enough. Like I could see if we're like a couple houses down. Not that it would be better, but like
drive there. Nice that she would show up and she would come in and it'd be like 10 o'clock at night. if we'd gone out to dinner or whatever, an event, and we'd come home and she'd knock on the door and she was like, I just drove around your neighborhood until you came home. And we were like,
what?
Okay. Yeah. And I didn't want to stay up at night because I was tired, but I didn't want to go to bed because I didn't want to leave them alone, because I didn't want the appearance of her being there. I didn't want anybody to say anything if something wasn't happening. You know, I didn't want it to look bad for him. But I didn't know that they were actually
Oh my goodness.
For at least a year at that point. So, but anyways, there's countless stories like this where she was always around. And so so much of reality just became so twisted that even my own daughter started calling her mom and telling her that she wished that she was her mom instead of me. So it was very devastating. And that's when the feelings of insecurity and insignificance and not being worthy of love and genuine friendship started just screaming from within me. I could not only see at that point that I was slowly being pushed out by her, but I was not only just feeling like I was being pushed out or threatened by her, but I really honestly felt like, I think she's trying to become me. So it was a lot to take in. What I didn't know at this point was all the stuff that he was probably telling her to, or the fantasy and the belief in her mind that she really was his wife.
Right.
So from there, it turned into vacations together, weekly dinners, family dinners at both houses. We did a lot together. Our families, we did a lot. And as a result, I started noticing interactions between them that were awkward, very flirty. They acted like husband and wife because they were. They would cook to get to dinner together. I'd offer to help. I'd try to help. And then I'd find myself not being needed. And so I would just go clean the house or tend to the kids instead. And so it's like after we got divorced, I got rid of all my dishes because she used them. I didn't even want to keep my dishes because I didn't want to have a plate that she cooked on. So there were just a lot of flags with their interactions, the things that they said, how they interacted, their body language. But the moment that I felt my place in my marriage was being jeopardized was one morning when I went to my closet to pray. And remember in the first episode, I shared how there were moments when God would wake me up in the middle of the night to pray over my home because I didn't know what was being brought in. Well, this particular morning, I got up and I laid down to pray. And I immediately heard the Holy Spirit in my spirit say, it was just like this thought that came in, she's been in here. And at this point, like, and all the times that she'd been over, I had never asked her to come upstairs with me. Our bedroom was upstairs, not once. She'd probably been to Lily's bedroom, but she'd never been in mine that I knew of. She clearly was. So I got up and I just walked around my closet a little bit, and I stood, like I landed right, like I stopped right in front of my clothes, and I just happened to reach for one of my shirts, and when I touched the sleeve, it was like everything in my body went on high alert. Like the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my arms. And I had that thought, she's tried this on. And it's weird because I didn't have proof. It was just that thought of feeling like this is not right. There's something not right in that moment. Later that day, I mentioned it to my husband, and I began to tell him the things that I was noticing with her and how I was concerned and I just felt like there were flags in that I didn't think that was, I felt like I wasn't supposed to be friends with her, and we weren't supposed to be having that much time with her family, that it was unhealthy. There were things that were happening with the kids at the same time too. And it just, all of it felt really off. And then I shared with him that I really felt like between the amount of time she'd been over, the way she was acting in the church, and like there were some roles of hers, things that she did at the church, and then being at the house, and just her interactions with my husband and my daughter. I expressed that to him, that I felt like she was trying to take over my life. And the reason that I'll give some examples specifically to that. I used to blog. I used to write all the time. During my marriage, I used to write. So in the last blog post that I wrote, and you shared something with me right before we started off the recording. So this is, I don't even know if you know this, but the last thing I wrote about on my blog was about having an eating disorder when I was 15. Yeah. Through until I was 30.
Wow. And
on that post, I wrote how it took the form of excessive exercise when I was a teenager. Of course, I was an athlete, so I was always running. I was, just go from one sport to the next, and I just ran a lot. But so I came in the form of more exercise than anything, and wouldn't eat much during the day, wouldn't eat much at school. I just kind of push it around and push it aside. It came mainly just like not having a full understanding of what nutrition that I needed, that actually needed that food to eat to have fuel for what all the running I was going to be doing that day. So it took the form of this excessive exercise. And by the time I hit my 20s, I was in college at that point. I hit a really big growth spurt in college. And where I could exercise and run a lot, I could not do as much in college because I had this growth spurt. And my body just shifted, it changed. And so I didn't really understand that mentally. And then that transferred into bulimia. And I struggled with that then until I was about 30, probably more like 29. But at 30 was when I dealt that I faced it.
Wow.
And so on that blog, I wrote about that whole time and what that looked like for me, and just because I could not control the things that were happening in my life.
Yep.
That was the one thing I could control.
Yep. I completely understand. And for those of you who don't know the reference, I had mentioned to Makaela before we started, I also struggled with an eating disorder. I was anorexic for several years. And I also did an episode on that. I don't remember off the top of my head what number it was, but I'm sure you can go back and find it. But so I completely understand that. So yes, I am with you.
Yeah, it felt so chaotic, and I didn't know who I was in my marriage. I didn't know who I was in life, because who I was and what I loved was not what I did anymore. It wasn't even like I didn't play sports anymore. And my whole life, like I played soccer growing up. Of course I did other sports, but that was what I always did. And then I got married, and of course, like everybody else, your life shifts at that point.
Right.
But then I go into this marriage, and what I thought was good and okay became really unhealthy, and a lot, so much mind games.
Right.
And I didn't know, when somebody is gaslighting you, and I didn't even know the term gaslighting. I didn't know what emotional abuse was. I didn't know what mental abuse was. The only thing I ever knew of was physical and sexual abuse.
Right.
Like just the terms. Right. So in marriage, then to hear things and, having statements be made to me that questioned me, just like even from this woman when she said, Makaela, she brings us coffee and she says, Makaela, this is what friends, or she said, Kayla, this is what friends do for each other.
Right.
She was sleeping with my husband.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Right.
So it's her saying to me, hey, I'm just over here as a friend and I love you.
Right.
And I just thought of you. So I thought I'd bring you coffee this morning. When the truth was, so she's trying to trick me to think that she's there with good motives, when the truth is she was there to see her husband.
Right.
And make her place known, make herself known, establish herself.
Right.
So yeah, I had this eating disorder, and that is what I dealt with for 15 years of my life, just quietly. I never told anybody that. Family didn't know, so my parents didn't know. My mom and I talk about it every now and then, just about how my mom has said before, like, I just didn't know. I can't believe I didn't pick up on it or not. And, but it was because I'm a very private person as is.
Right.
And that's a part of the disorder for the most part.
Oh, yeah. You can hide a lot more than, well, I'm sure people can pick up on that, but yeah, you can hide a lot. You can hide a lot. You can only let people see. We come up with really good excuses for all kinds of stuff. Absolutely. Well, and I don't know about you. It took me a minute to realize that I was anorexic, because I still ate. I just didn't eat very much at all. Like, but I was excessive exercise and counting like every single calorie that I consumed. And I mean, like, and then if I ate more than I thought that I should have, I would go run some more. I mean, so, but because I just thought anorexia was just, you don't eat at all. And I was like, well, I'm eating. And so it took me a really long time to even understand that I had an eating disorder. And then, you know, all the things you have to do to start getting out of that is just a whole different chapter. But anyway,
so when I was 30, I found this website. It's called Setting Captives Free, and I did look it up recently, so it's still there, still active today. So it's for all different type of addictions. Alcohol, drugs, you name it. So, and eating disorders was one of them, and I don't know how I found it, because it wasn't like a common website, but so I saw it and I was like, I need help. I realized that for myself. I need help. And I felt like one morning in prayer that the Lord had said, I want you to go tell your husband this. And I was like, oh, I can't tell him that. And so I sat down on the couch and I was like, I need to tell you something. And so he's like, okay. And I said, I have an eating disorder. And he's like, well, yeah, I know that. And I was like, well, how did you know? And he's like, because you barely eat anything. And I was like, so anyways, so that was just something that I felt like the Lord was like, I need you to just take responsibility for yourself. This thing has control over you. You think you have control over it, but it really has control over you. And so I walked through that, and that website was powerful. They set you up with a mentor who has also finished the program and walked out of it. And they sign up to be a mentor. Not everybody's a mentor, but you sign up if you feel like you want to help others. And it was really powerful. So I was sharing about that on the blog, that just how I walked through it, how it affected me, and how good God was to just give me that insight and the wisdom, discernment to know this has control over you, and it's time to try to take control back in the sense of letting it go and giving it over to God. So I shared about that. So she came to me one morning and she told me that she had stayed up all night reading my blog, and that she decided that she was going to have an eating disorder. Like, those were her exact words. So I just decided, I read your blog all night, I stayed up all night, and I just wanted you to know I'm going to have an eating disorder. And I was like, who decides to have an eating disorder? I didn't decide to do all that. I was so lost in myself and lies.
You don't decide to do that. Oh my word.
So it really caught me off guard. Because that was the last thing that I ever wanted somebody to do through sharing my story. So I stopped writing, and I have blogs, I have stuff up, but I don't share it with anybody ever. It's like set on private, or if I share something, it's so specific as to who I make it public to just be able to see. So it's like, and I haven't written in a long time. So from that moment on, she intentionally starved herself. And it's not just me that noticed. I know plenty of people that noticed it over time, because it was very evident. So I watched her body slowly transition into a smaller version of herself. And when I say she starved herself, I mean, like, kind of like what you were saying, like, you have food on your plate, but for her, she would take one spoonful of whatever was in the, and then she would just push it around and not eat. And so the next thing I know, she's like asking, about the clothes I wear and makeup I buy and the shops that I like to go to. So, and I'm just thinking natural conversation. So I tell her, and it's not a big deal if somebody wants to shop at the same place or wear the same clothes. I don't care. But it is a big deal when someone's like mimicking everything you're doing. And being at your house constantly. When all the signs are there. So the next thing I know, she's buying the same brand of jeans as me. She's shopping at the same stores. She's wearing almost identical outfits. And then one day at church, this other friend of mine who, and again, I didn't know who to trust at church. So I just don't talk to anybody about like my personal stuff ever. So I just keep that to myself and keep on trucking through life. So I go to church one day, and this other friend of mine at church, who I would consider still is a really great friend. She pulls me aside and she's like, I feel like I need to say something to you. I don't mean it as gossip. It's just something that I'm noticing. And she had picked up on the same thing with the eating disorder. And, but she looked at me and she said directly to me, said verbatim, I feel like this woman is trying to become you. And I was like, it's not just me.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
made me feel so just seen in that moment. And I just was
Validated.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, I said, I thought I was going crazy
Right.
thinking that. And she's like, nope. And she gave her own examples. And I was like, that's exactly. And I've tried to say that to, but,
Wow.
so eventually the dynamic of that relationship with the woman herself too, not just with my husband, but
Right.
with this woman as well, just was this full-blown gaslighting from both of them, as if they were trying to convince me that she was my best friend. And
Right.
so there's just so many examples of that, of how over 4 years of that particular relationship strips my identity and my confidence, because the things that I would notice in, your spouse is supposed to be your best friend. Your spouse is
Right.
supposed to be the one that you should be able to say, these things don't seem right to me.
Right.
Can we talk about this? And have that healthy relationship to say, yeah, let's sit down and talk about it.
So how did he respond when you did say that?
That I was crazy, that I was imagining things. He would tell me, he would say, don't, how dare you question her friendship to you? She loves you. She does a lot of things for you. It was just constant like that, those words over and over. So it wasn't even to have the conversation. I think at one point down the road, so they were together 4 years. So near the end of that relationship, he had gotten tired of her and moved to the third woman. And so she was acting very, very crazy at that point, because she was trying her best to keep her marriage together with him. And I said to him, like, she needs to get some help, and it doesn't need to be from our family anymore. And he said, oh, she's just crazy, but again, I didn't know what he could have been saying, the exact same thing to her about me.
Right.
So I don't while I look at this and I listen and I think on the things that happened, I also feel like God has given me moments to not excuse her behavior, but to at least have an understanding of the amount of mental abuse and emotional abuse he did to her too, to convince somebody that, he was telling her her sole purpose in life was to be his wife, to serve him and love him. And that if she loved me, she would sleep with him. And that is extreme. She admits to having an affair. She admits to wanting to have that affair, but then you're in it and it's a fight to get out. And so that so anyways, I want to say this on that note, like, I was praying before we got on here, because I don't want it to focus on, I don't want to share this because it stripped me away. I did not know who I was anymore. I did not feel worthy. I did not feel loved. I felt like I was a bother to even be around, because I was told that by him. I was very, her positioning herself into my life and acting like she's taking over my life and acting like my daughter's mom. Like, it just is like the slowly moving, like pushing the rightful woman out of her position. But I do, as I was praying, I was just thinking, like, there's women that are in the same position as her right now. There's women who are in these relationships. You're in an inappropriate relationship with somebody right now, and you see the signs and you're seeing that some things are off. And I just want to encourage you that trust your instinct and get out. It does not matter if you are married and you are seeking the comfort of another man, even if it's emotional, get out. And you know what? It may cost you your family, but you do not want to walk any further into, and who knows, you might have the most understanding, loving husband who would say, okay, let's go to counseling. Let's work through this. So I also just want to say, like, while it all sounds so crazy, it's wild, and which is why it's so hard for me to talk smoothly through it. It's like, I can even feel it in my spirit. Like, I get nervous as I talk, because like you said, there's just so many dynamics, so many different moving pieces to it. While it sounds so crazy, there is a place in my heart, and this is what does not seem normal. And I know that this is not normal, but I do actually care about her. I don't want to be friends.
Right.
I didn't want to be friends then,
right.
but I did actually care about her. And there was one point where I said to her, she was acting so weird at one point, and I just said, I wish you could just be yourself, because when you're yourself, you're really fun to be around. And I really liked that person. I don't like this other person, but I do like who you actually are.
Right.
And I meant that. And I mean that today, because I did actually care. I still care about the well-being. And I hate that this man did this to her too.
Right.
I hate that she wanted it. I hate that she wanted to walk into it.
Right.
And then I really hate that she was trapped in it.
Right.
So I say all of that to know, like, narcissist, and I'm calling him a narcissist.
Right.
I said this in the first episode. They tear you down.
Right.
They slowly chisel away who you actually are. So he did that to me, did that to her. Slowly chisels away who that person really is. Makes you question everything you're thinking, everything that you're worried about. He makes you question it and turns it, and then he crushes you. They tear you down in order to build you up the way they want you to be. And then they tear you down again and again and again until there's nothing left of you but a shell. And you're just a shell of the person you used to be.
Well, and that's just also a testament to the power of a lie, right? Like, especially when you're like so vulnerable. But I actually, in one of my books, I dedicated kind of an entire chapter to this. Like, it does sound extreme, right? All of this, like, you know, how did this possibly get to this point? And, you know, and I'm sure a bajillion people have thought that. I mean, I've thought that in my own life, in my own like circumstances, which are different, but like, how do you get to this point? Like, that's crazy. Well, it's because it's the power of a lie. It's the power of rationalization. It's the power of justification. It's the power of, within every lie, there is a morsel of truth. Otherwise, no one would believe it. And then you just get sucked in. And then once you're in, you're like, okay, well, I guess a little bit further is not going to hurt. And it just continues. But this doesn't happen overnight, right? Like, this was years in the making. And so I guess for anybody listening who is like shock and awed, you know, we're like, this is how sin works. And especially when you have someone who is bent on it and whose entire agenda is evil, and has no compass. The Holy Spirit is not alive and working in his heart. And so it's not as crazy as it seems, because, or is crazy, but it's not crazy to imagine it as being possible, because that's how sin is. And that's how broken this whole situation was. But again, it didn't happen overnight. It's not as if one morning you woke up and everything changed, and then it was as it became 4 years down the road. So like, as you said, it was a slow process. It was chipping you away. It was making you question everything. And then again, you are his wife, like, and you're a Christian, and you know that you're supposed to submit to him and supposed to follow him and supposed to love him, and and then you're doing the right thing by going to him and asking him questions and confiding in him and wanting to have deeper conversations that were meaningful. And then you are being met with a cold shoulder, and worse, being accused of being crazy. So you're putting your heart out there and being vulnerable and being met with something and you're doing what's biblical. When you're talking about, like, these are biblical things that we are supposed to do. And then you're being met with just completely unbiblical, anti-life, anti-God responses, certainly anti-gospel too. And so it's just the confusion that you must have been experiencing. And then, of course, coupled with, you know, eating disorder and all this other stuff. I mean, that is massive. That is very, very massive. And then to talk about how could you be confident in anything? I mean, I don't know. It's just, that was a lot.
It was a lot. And so I say that now I have the hindsight to look back and see what happened mentally as he broke her down too.
Right.
But in the middle of it, you know, she wasn't broken down in the middle of it. I mean, she had her own issues, but it wasn't because of him.
Right.
That she was expressing. It was because of some other things in her life that she felt like she had her issues for. So I was being, I was getting this gaslighting, this convincing you that something is not true when you know it's true. That's what gaslighting is. You know, if you've never heard the term gaslight, there's it's become more common over the last few years. That narcissism has both become more common, but the movie Gaslight is where the term was coined, or well, shortly after that. The movie's about this husband who's trying to convince his wife that she's crazy by removing a painting from the wall, and he tells her that she did it, and then he punishes her for taking it down. Well, she doesn't remember that she did it, and so then he's like, "You did this. You did this last night." And then she's like, well, no, I don't remember doing that, but I guess I must have. And it happens so many times through the movie, like daily, he's like slowly stripping her away. It's full of examples where he literally drives her to a breakdown and convincing herself that she must be crazy because he's so adamant. Right. She just doesn't remember these things. And in the end, she ends up finding this letter that she had initially said in the beginning, I know this exists. And he's like, that never happened. You're crazy. I can't believe you would do this. What's wrong with you? I think we need to get you psychological help. And then she starts believing it. So she locks herself in the house and she becomes this crazy woman because he said she's crazy. Right. So that's where gaslighting comes from. So here I am in my marriage. I didn't know this movie until like last year. I watched the movie last year. And I watched the whole thing and I was like, yes, that's exactly it. So I had been fighting this constantly for 10 years. So that first relationship that he was in was 5 years. That second one with her was 4 years. That last one that he was in was that final year. And every time I brought something up, it was that response. You're crazy, Makaela. Right. Like, why would you think this? That didn't happen. You're being emotional. You're being dramatic. Anything that you can, you name it. To get the attention off of himself, he redirects it. So every fight was me recognizing that something was off and asking for clarity, only to be met with lies. And it wasn't just coming from him; it was coming from her too. So, and of course, she didn't realize at that point. I think today I can't speak for her, but I would assume and I would hope that today she would be able to recognize how that played out, that impact that he had on her too. But we had this this last fight that we went through, argument, really, well, fight, I guess. It was the last big argument we had before everything fell apart. It was just a few weeks before we'd gone to King's Dominion with her family and the third woman's family, and we had to wear these shirts with a hashtag with the name Bruton. It was the combination of all three of our last names. I hated wearing it because I was like, I don't like this. Right. I wanted to burn it. I know I saved it at some point after everything came out because I wanted to burn it, and then I think I just trashed it because I can't find it anymore. But it was just so telling of what happened in that whole dynamic of their relationships. So anyhow, we had gone to King's Dominion, spent a whole day together, and it was a really weird day in the sense that everybody's there with their own families, husband and wife and kids, and we're walking around, we're doing the thing, riding rides, kids are riding rides together, and then there were moments where he'd walk off with one of the women, and they'd have these, like, you could just tell they were whispering, and it was just weird. Like, why are they walking together? It's just so weird. And not with their husbands, or why am I not walking with it? Like, it was just very odd. Everything was very weird. So
what did their husbands like think?
Normal.
React? Really?
Yeah, they didn't have a clue. I mean, they had no idea.
Weird.
And I haven't had conversations with them to know if they ever picked up on anything. But as far as I know, they didn't have any idea. Okay. Huh. So we go back, we ended up staying in a hotel that night because we stayed all day there, and then we were going to go shopping the next day. So we all got a hotel room, separate hotel rooms. But he wanted to play cards. They wanted to stay up and play cards, and all of our rooms were on the first floor. It was right there by the lobby. Our room was 3 doors down from the lobby. And they wanted to stay up. It was probably 11 o'clock, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night at this point. One husband stayed in the room with the kids. The other husband stayed out with everybody, and I stayed out. And he asked me, he's like, what's wrong with you? And I was like, we should be in the room. We shouldn't be out here by ourselves. Like, we shouldn't be out here with them. Like, what if Lily wakes up and she's scared? Right. And Lily's 11 at the time. But still, you're in a hotel. Right. And you wake up in the middle of the night. Any kid's going to probably freak out. Their parents aren't there. They're like, where am I? Right. And so he was mad, and I was like, but I didn't want to leave him out there because I just seen too much, and there was just way too many flags over the years. And we just come off a trip from Guatemala where something major happened down there. Same conversations where he had told me we were playing cards down there too. Well, I was playing. I did not want to. Same exact scenario. We're in another country. Our kids are in the bunk room, going to bed. I said, I don't think she should be, what if she wakes up scared? Same exact thing. And I said, it's not the job. It's not the duty of this other lady who's in there sleeping like the other adult. She doesn't need to watch our kids. I just think all of us need to go to bed.
Right.
Mainly, I didn't like the interactions between, I didn't like their body language. Right. And those two were looking at me like I was a threat to them. And I was looking at them like, it's him? What?
Right.
I was so confusing. And I got up and I left, and he walked over to me that night. I was like, just forget it. I'm going to go to bed. And he got up, cornered me where we were at, and he whispered and he said, what is your problem? And I said, my problem is your relationship with these two. Right. I said, you're acting like you're their best friend, and you're not. I'm supposed to be their best friend.
Right.
And he said, well, you make all of us uncomfortable. And I was like, he said, anytime you're around, you make all of us uncomfortable. And I was like, well, so my response was, fine, have at it. You can have them. I'm not doing this anymore. And come to find out that woman, there was an extreme thing that happened on that trip. I'll not say that here, but something happened on that. And the next day, and so that happened that time. And then a month later, we're at this Kings Dominion trip. So we're sitting out there playing cards again. And I'm like, I just think we should be in the room. And he's arguing. So finally I go in the room, and he comes in later, and he lays down next to me, and he says, I'm really sorry. And I said, I just don't understand what your draw is to these women. And he got so mad. I mean, he just flew hot, and he walked across the room, sat down in a chair, and I sat up in the bed on my knees, and I looked across the room. So at this point, there's a bed in between us now, and he's in this chair, and I sat up and I said, I am just trying to save our marriage and our family. And he looked at me and he goes, ugh, you're disgusting. You should be in a mental hospital.
What?
And I threw my pillow down. I laid down on my pillow. I put my face down on that pillow, and I screamed as loud as I could into that pillow. And I just said to the Lord, I don't know what else to do. I've tried everything. I tried everything over those years, from kindness, gentleness,
right,
straightforward. I wasn't allowed to get counseling. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody. I tried everything. I tried yelling, everything,
right,
and nothing worked. So between the within a month it would be over. At that point our marriage would be over. Right. That was the last time. So between the women confessing to the affairs, the details of all those said affairs, and all the additional abuse and the danger when seeing him that followed after everything came out, I had zero confidence left. I had no value or worth. I did not feel like I even deserved to breathe. And I remember just thinking I wasn't worth being loved. I wasn't worth being known, and I wasn't worth friendship. And in all honesty, it didn't just end there. It wasn't just those three friends. It showed up after everything came out too. I lost so many people during that time, unintentionally from a lot, just because the nature of life. Right. But also very close friends. Like, things shifted after that because trauma is heavy. And especially when you're going through extreme trauma, not everybody is equipped to handle that and to stand by and sit in the fire with you. So it's very heavy. But the reality is, not everybody's meant to walk through hard days with you. And that's hard to accept because you want them to, and you value them, and you feel safe with certain people, but not everybody is actually meant to walk through that. And so it's hard to come to the acceptance of that. And it's okay for people to put up boundaries for themselves. That was that was something hard for me to accept, was that, because of how he was, and leading up to everything, and then especially afterwards when everything came out, there was a lot of things being said about, well, it's just everybody was scared.
Right.
And, they want to protect their families too. And it just, anybody that's was close to me put themselves into a position that they would have to worry. So, so those friendships ended too. And so that was really hard. It was really hard to overcome a lot. But it's okay. It's okay that happened, but it did hurt.
Right.
So there was a lot of wrestling to find myself again, even after that. I want to say though, I think the moment that changed for me, I know that the moment that changed for me was, it was so apparent to me that since that time, I have not once wanted to go back or beg God to bring those people back into my life, because I realized that in having those people in my life, it was hindering the work that God was trying to do in my life, just me personally, because my focus was like other people helping you get through, and you're trying to like, well, maybe I should do this, maybe I shouldn't do that. And it just needs to be you and God.
Right. And
God just needs to speak to you, and you just need to hear him. So it was okay because it allowed the proper healing to come into my life.
Right.
And those friends were godly friends. They were wonderful people.
Right.
It just had to happen, and it's okay. So once that was removed from my life though, that's when my healing really started. And then the moments where I did begin to change and I felt my confidence coming back, was when I went on a trip to Colorado, and I had a friend that said, hey, at that time, they said, hey, if you ever need to get away, you should just come on out. So I was like, I called up and I was like, okay, did you mean that? Because I need to get away. And they were like, yes, absolutely, come out. So I did. And the minute the wheels on that plane lifted, I felt such peace in me, except that I didn't have my daughter with me. That was the only thing. I just wanted to grab her and bring her with me. But I went by myself, and that trip became a stone of remembrance for me, because it was on that trip, it was up in the mountains with my feet in rushing cold water, that I felt safe enough to say yes to listening to God again. God was speaking to me the whole time. I just didn't want to hear it because I didn't know what to do with it.
Right.
But he used that trip to speak to me through songs, through books, through people, and through kids, which is so crazy to me. He spoke through kids. It was exactly what I needed. I made a new friend on that trip, whose kids I also got to know. And it was those 3 kids that showed me that I was worth knowing, and that I was worth being loved. And those kids, they will never know the depth of their impact, but it started the healing process in me and me becoming me again, which is who I am today, and confident. So I still have nightmares from the past, from the marriage, from my friendships. But instead of waking up heavy-hearted, I have learned how to acknowledge that those things did happen, but it's no longer present in my life, and it's no longer who I am, and I'm free from that. So that's a big thing. I know who I am today. I'm smart. I am kind. I care, and I love hard. And loving hard gets me in trouble, but it's how God made me.
Yes.
I've been like that since I was young. I have loved hard. Love can often be misinterpreted.
Yes.
But that's who I am. And it's just genuine. So I have to learn how to guard that part of my heart and say, like, okay, you love them, but don't give your heart to
right.
Don't give too much. You got to protect your heart too. I'm funny. I did not realize I was funny. I think I'm funny, but everybody thinks I'm funny, but I am funny. There's some days where I'll make a joke and I'm like, that was a joke. And then they're like, oh my gosh, that was actually funny. Dry humor. I don't know. It sounds funny, but I was led to believe for so long that the things that I said was just stupid and dumb, and that I shouldn't be speaking. There were times like in home groups that we would have our home group over, and I would want to interject my personal beliefs on the subject, on the scripture that we were talking about. And I would begin to talk, and I'd look up and I'd see him looking at me, and he would be shaking his head right to left, as saying no and scowling at me and just telling me to be quiet. And it would be where everybody was looking more towards my direction, or whoever was talking, and he wouldn't do it when somebody would look, but I wasn't allowed to talk. I never was given the instruction, you're not allowed to talk to men, but if I was talking to a man at the church, let's say a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night,
Right.
just greeting somebody, how you doing? How's family? Blah, 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 whatever, small talk. If I gave him a hug, inevitably, I would be accused of having an affair or having an emotional affair. Or you spend too much time. Well, I can tell you're attracted to him. And I'm like, I just said hi. And I asked how the family was.
Right.
I had to learn how to talk to men again after everything
Right.
came out. I didn't know how to I have a great friend today who is a man, and God has used that to be a safe space to know what having a healthy interactions with a man looks like.
Right.
That's not, it's not romantic. It's
Right.
legitimately just friendship.
Right.
And it's nice to actually be able to have something that's normal.
Right.
So I had to learn how to talk again. I was so used to being cut off in the middle of my statements that now when I do share, I start talking and I immediately pause before I finish what I'm going to say. And I find that it becomes an awkward moment because they're waiting for me to finish and I'm waiting for them to cut me off. And
Wow.
I realize, oh, they're letting me talk. And then I get self-conscious because I'm like, what if I sound stupid?
No.
And then I finish my statement and then just the conversation goes on like normal. So it really affected every aspect of my my cognitive, my brain. I call it my trauma brain. I'm on the phones every day with work, and I was talking to a potential student for the school that I work at, and she was like, I'm really sorry. I'm going to make mistakes when I talk, and I don't know what she was just saying that she has a hard time talking. And I was like, that's okay. You just take your time. I was like, we're good. You take your time, express what you need to, and we'll just talk through it. And she's like, well, she starts telling me a little bit about her history. She said, well, I had this happen. They were extreme cases, extreme trauma. And she's like, and I don't know what to call it, but I can't always finish my sentences, and I can't always think of the words. I was like, oh, it's trauma brain. I was like, I call that my trauma brain. I totally get that. And I said, I've been through some extreme trauma too. I was like, different circumstances, but when you go through extreme trauma, it's like, I've heard from other people that have been to traumatic brain injury doctors, and they've said like, that's equivalent of being in a car accident. It's very heavy. And you can't quote me on that because I gotta look that up and verify that. But it really does affect your brain. There are so many times a day that I can't remember. Not just like I'm in my 40s and you're starting to lose your memory a little bit, like the normal stuff, right? That still happens, but then you tack on trauma brain, and you're like, okay, just give me a minute here. My brain's not working.
Yeah. Well, and I got it. So one thing that I have to say, because I've been thinking about it, I thought about it when you were sharing the first episode too, but I vividly remember being at the church, because again, I think we said in the first episode that's how we met, was at that church, and sitting under his teaching, because he would teach a lot. And he wasn't the senior pastor, but he was like grooming to be, and the executive pastor. And but I very much remember him, Sunday nights were his typical teaching time. So he would teach, but I distinctly and vividly remember him every time he talked about you from the pulpit. It was the most gushy, like, I don't deserve her. Like, he would cry. And I mean, like, and that wasn't just like one time. I mean, this happened quite a bit. And so it's just been so, I don't even know, gut punchy and just sick to your stomach kind of feeling to know that that's what he was saying from the pulpit, and then what was actually happening in reality. And it's just awful. And so, but to confirm and maybe validate your point of like your mind being broken, is because you're living in this constant dichotomy where you're experiencing something and all of your intuition, and I believe Holy Spirit, is like like this is wrong. Something is wrong. This is not right. But then what you're being told is completely the opposite. And then what he's saying publicly is completely the opposite. And so I just can't imagine, like, of course that's going to hurt, like, and break you, because how could it not? I mean, but I very vividly remember those times. And then, come to find out, that's why I think the first time you posted something, I remember where I was, like, how everybody remembers like 9/11, where you were when you found out 9/11. Like I remember exactly where I was when I read your first thing post that something had happened. I do. And I don't know why. And that's why I just believe God has been over this. And we've talked about that like from the beginning, because I literally remember where I was sitting. I was sitting on our couch in the living room on this Chase sofa that we had. And I had I was on my computer, and it just showed up, and I read it, and it's like the world stopped. And it was so weird, because actually I had started my writing ministry prior to that. And I actually went back to Lynchburg, and I actually on a Wednesday night spoke.
Yeah, I remember that.
But really, that's so funny. So, but when I was even reaching out about doing that, this is weird. I was getting weird vibes from him. So the senior pastor was his dad, and he told me, oh, that'd be great. Talk to him, because he kind of like schedules everything. And it was very strange. I just got like weird, prickly, the spidey sense, which is the Holy Spirit, the intuition. But like something was just off. Like there was just something really off, and it wasn't received, and it wasn't. I mean, it just, there was something very distinctly off, and I just vividly remember that. And then I ended up, really working with the senior pastor to flush everything out anyway. And then I remember getting there, and it was off. Like there was just, I don't know. It was just something that was super, just, again, I have no words tonight, but it was just weird. It was just off. But so something I'd always had to check in my spirit from that point on about it. And then,
which is so important.
Yes. And then when I, that very first post that you did, just kind of, again, you didn't say much as detail wise, but enough to know, something really bad had happened, and like the world stopped, and my heart just sunk, like it just broke, and God just very much had me in, like I was involved in this, even though I'm very far away, and we hadn't talked, and we didn't really know each other very well, but I'm like, I don't know. He just like really burdened me for you and for this whole situation. But just going back to, I've just been, and then praying, and just, I was just broken. And so following very closely, but I knew that I almost knew then that something was going to happen, but I didn't know what. And I obviously didn't want to rush anything, especially like right when it first happens. That's not the time to do anything. But all that to say, like, so even me as someone as almost as far removed from this as you can possibly get, knew that something was off. And I guess I just want to give credence to people who are listening, like that intuition, especially if you're a Christian, that's discernment. That Absolutely. Is the Holy Spirit. And not every time. I mean, I guess you can be paranoid. So, I mean, I'm not, speaking for God here, but like no. if it's that nudge in you, like, don't ignore that. And in my situation, obviously, like I was in no position to do anything. I had no conviction to do anything other than pray and just be watchful. Like that was kind of like the impression that he just kind of put into my heart. Like, just be watchful, like tune into this and just be present, even though like not physically, but, and
mentally present.
Yes. But just, and spiritually present, and just be your cheerleader. Like, I think from that point on, that was just what he wants. But I just got that impression. So all I'm saying is, guys, like when you have a genuine relationship with Jesus, when you are his and his spirit is dwelling within you, like don't ignore these things. Don't suppress the spirit just because it may not seem normal, or, oh, I'm just going crazy, or, something like that. Like continually bring it before him, continually strive to seek out the truth, because the truth does come out. And obviously it came out, it wasn't lovely when it came out, in your situation, but it does come out. And so I don't know. I don't know why I shared all that, but it's just to validate, of course you were broken. And of course it's taken a really long time to heal from that. And the healing has also not been linear, because there are so many different facets. Again, like speaking, you would never think that your speech and your ability to finish a complete thought, like that probably wasn't even on your radar. You probably didn't even realize like it was happening until later, and then you catching yourself. So it's very layered. Give yourself patience, give yourself time, but just seeing the confidence. And so let's shift a little bit to a closely related thing, and that is freedom. And I know that in the last episode you mentioned that you were a prisoner, but you had to live like you were free. And so at what point, and again, at what point or series of points, it probably wasn't like an instant moment, did you first start to realize, okay, something like I am a prisoner?
That's
like the reality just starts to sink in a little bit.
Yeah. That's a great question. It was most definitely when I was told we weren't allowed to get counseling. I couldn't get a counselor, and he would not go see a counselor in town. He said people would talk, and he didn't want people to talk. And I was not allowed to see his dad, who was our head pastor. I was not allowed to go to him, although I did go to him. I was thinking about it the other day. It was approximately 8 years ago when I went. We were going through we were in the middle of all that. And I, again, did not know what was going on. I didn't understand it. And I wasn't allowed to talk to my parents about it. I wasn't allowed to talk to his parents or seek counsel or go to counseling as a couple. And he did not want me to talk to his dad, because he had said that he did not want his dad. He didn't want to disappoint his dad any more than he already had. And his backstory, he had gotten kicked out of the school that we went to, the college we went to, and had gone to jail for a couple weekends for what he did. And that was his testimony. So he always felt like he had let his dad down then, and he didn't want to continue letting him down. So I wasn't allowed to talk to him. He didn't want us to talk to any counselors in town, because he said people talk. And I was like, well, they shouldn't be talking, because it's confidential by law. And then we did sit one day. This is when I learned this term. It's stonewalling. I did not know this term until this very day. So at that time, we weren't allowed to go to counseling, but I promise, I think God totally did this. He did two things for me during that time. One, he brought a girl that was a lady. I don't mean girl, a lady who was in her master's. Well, both of these ladies were in their master's program. The first one was doing internship work, or she had to get some certain amount of hours of counseling. And brought her to the office. And so she said, can I sit and do marriage counseling with you and Makaela? Not knowing anything else going on. So he's like, yeah, that'd be great. Sure, you can come and do it. So we did it. So I expressed some things in there where I was like, if I do or say something that makes him mad, he doesn't talk to me. And it's like days before he'll talk to me again. And she said, well, that's called stonewalling. Why do you do that to her? And so we talked through that.
Wow.
And so there was that session. And then I think like a year later, sometime within that, I had another friend fly out from out of state. She was doing her counseling class at the school here, the college here, and needed a place to stay. And the place that she was going to stay didn't work out that week. So, and I didn't know her. She was a friend of a friend. And, so she comes into the house, and she's a counselor. And so I promise you, God brought counselors right to me, for me, not for us, just for me. And so the second counselor that came in stayed for a week, and she'd go to class in the mornings, come home, finish her work, whatever. And then we'd spend the rest of the evening, either hanging out with Lily or, just grabbing coffee. And we talked through so many details of what was going on. That was the only outlet that I had.
Wow.
And that was when I first learned of the word. And she said it then, but I still did not fully see it. She said, he's a narcissist. This is the behaviors. He's fitting the checklist of what narcissists do. And I can tell you, after everything came out, I've read so many books on narcissism and how it affects other people, how people control, how narcissists will control other people. And they have these pages where, you can go through point by point. Do they do this? Do you see these behaviors? And he checks every one of those boxes. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's eye-opening, right?
Yeah.
And so I looked back after everything came out. I looked back at that time that friend had come in town and said that. And I was like, wow, she said it back then, but I didn't know what it was. Right. I didn't really understand it all. So,
wow.
We weren't allowed to get counseling. That was when I first found out or figured out that I'm stuck. I can't get out. I'm not allowed to talk to anybody, but I did go to his dad one time 8 years ago. And we were going over there, I guess for dinner. And, I went early. I intentionally went early and we're sitting there and he said, honey, are you okay? And I said, no, our marriage is not good. We're not in a good place. And he was like, well, marriages go through that. I don't even remember what all he said beyond that because it was just kind of like, okay, it was nothing. Mainly, I wasn't going there for advice. I was just going there to tell them things are not right. Something's going on. I don't know what's going on, but things are not right. And then I did go to New Mexico shortly after that. Went out and stayed with my parents for a little bit. Lily and I did. It was a way for me to get away for a little bit. And it was on that trip, my mom noticed, she heard a conversation on the phone. I was on the phone with them at one point. She heard a conversation. It's kind of like those things you remember where you're sitting when it happened.
Right. Yeah.
And she was like, things aren't good, are they? And I was like, nope. And so it's kind of at that point where, not at that point for my parents. My parents actually, after everything came out, we talk about this all the time. My parents are really the one place when I look at my relationships in the future, I don't want to always have to talk about what happened to me in my life. Eventually it will phase itself out. It'll be a part of my life, but it won't be every day. But I want to be able to have open conversation. If somebody who's close to me says, oh my gosh, I was remembering this, and then just naturally have that conversation during that time. I want it to be okay to be able to bring those moments up. But so my parents are a really safe space to do that. We talk about it often, but my parents actually started noticing things were different right after we got engaged. They didn't say anything at the time because they were like, well, you love him and we chose him. We wanted to be with him and we didn't want to stand in the way. We didn't want to make you mad. We were, all the questions that you would go through as a parent even, but they're like hindsight.
Right.
But anyhow, that was it. I really felt like I was a prisoner at that point. So there was a point near the end. I think I said this in the first episode. We had sold our house and then moved in with my parents in hopes to buy land in 2018. That's when everything came out. And so we were at my parents' house. And there were many nights where we came home after being with the other families. The other women, and things would happen, weird things, weird conversations, weird behaviors, not just where I would notice, but like everybody at the table would notice. That one woman that was his spiritual wife was really struggling through the acceptance of her husband moving on to another woman. And so she was doing some extreme things to get attention. And so things like that, weird things like that would happen. And so I would run home, and because I wasn't allowed to talk, and according to him, he did not know that I had shared some things with my mom in the past. And but anyhow, I got to a point where I would run in at night. We'd come in the house, he and my daughter would go upstairs and to go to bed, and I would run to my parents' room. I'd be like, I'm just going to go tell my parents I'm just going to go say goodnight. Like, okay. And I knew I had 30 seconds. That's it. 30 seconds. And I would run into the house. I would tell my mom and dad what happened within 30 seconds. And then I'd run upstairs so he wouldn't know I was talking. But I knew that it got to a point, it was so bad. I knew that I needed to tell somebody in case something happened, because I knew things were not okay. I mean, I was dropping bombs on my parents at night, and I would run upstairs so he wouldn't know. And I would just leave them with this heavy information. and we wouldn't be able to talk about it until the next day when he would leave for work. But I was so afraid that something was going to happen to me, that I just needed somebody to know that our marriage is not okay if something did happen to me, if I went missing or something. And honestly, that jet ski incident would be a few weeks later. You know, the jet ski, that was an easy way for him to get rid of his wife. But I didn't feel free, honestly, until years later. So even though I was free after it all came out, I didn't feel free until years later. As in not a prisoner. Because I was physically free from him, but I was mentally not free because he was still trying to control me. And that's really hard. That's one of the hard things about abuse. I mean, I was even messaging with somebody today who's in that same situation still. And, you know, she's like, the messages that were coming across, it's a mental game. Like you have to get to the point where you're like, I'm not even going to respond to this because it's lies. And that's what they want, is for me to respond. So it's really hard to fight out of that. So the truth is, to get to freedom, I had to fight. Some days I ran from him, like physically ran. And this is after everything happened, after everything came out. Most days I didn't interact with them. I learned that with a narcissist, what they hate is if you ignore them. So I learned how to scan messages and see what needed to be addressed and what didn't. A lot of times I'd write my reply and my mom would go, nope. I'd erase it and I'd rewrite it and she goes, still no. And then I'd rewrite it. She's like, much better, because it would be very simple. Yes, no. You just learn that you cannot have conversations with those type of people because that's what they want. They want to monopolize your time by doing all of that. And honestly, my mom fought for my freedom too. My mom went full mama bear. You'd think that it would have been my dad. But my dad was so broken, just like me. He still is to this day. Like, it takes him a lot to even listen to the last podcast. My mom called. She's like, well, we listened on our way home from their trip. And, but it's still hard. He tears up a lot because he gave permission to my husband.
So I was thinking that when you were talking about, how your parents kind of had that like hiccup in their spirit too, like, you know, things changed when you guys got engaged and they didn't say anything. And so one follow-up I had was, how have they dealt with this? You know, that has to kill you as a parent to have that suspicion and then quash it, like, and obviously hoping that they're wrong, you know, and, you know, that it's not a big deal or it'll work itself out or whatever. But like, how have they processed this and like come to healing? Cause that, I mean, golly, it's hard to do it for yourself, but you think about your child going through that. I mean, that's just another level.
Yeah. That's a deep level that I can't fully speak to because I know they're still healing. I mean, my dad, he does. Just the other day, he always has his little journal out. He's writing and he's reading and studying, and he'll call me and he'll be like, so the other day he said to me, he had gone to church on Sunday and he took notes from the sermon. And basically, in a nutshell, the pastor was talking about what the role of a father does, or the spouse does. I mean, the role of the spouse, a husband to the wife, and like, just, you're supposed to love, honor, and protect, and look out, support, and be stable. And my dad said, he teared up in that moment, and he said, "Your husband didn't do this for you." And he said, and now you don't have your husband. You don't have a husband now. So there's nobody to look out for you. There's nobody to protect you. There's nobody to stand up for you, support you, be a rock, and be stability with you, for you, and spiritually lead and guide you. And he said, so I feel like as your father, until you find your husband, that's my role. And he said, so that's why I show up. Like, he came up a couple of weeks ago, or like a month ago, and he fixed things around the house. And he said that before. He's like, you know, you don't have a husband. It's what a husband should be doing. And yeah, women can do it too. I mean, I do it. I did it when I was married, but fix up the house. But just loving and providing and caring for your wife, caring for your kids. So my dad is just he said to me in tears, like, this is my role until you find a husband. And when you do find a husband, when your husband is finally here, then I will step back and let your husband step in and take that role. And so my dad still struggles deeply with it. It's very hard to talk, like hear conversations about it. It's hard for him to read some of my posts. He can't read some of them because it's so personal. And because they dealt, like the pain I felt, they felt. They were there that day, you know, and I think they would still feel it if they were in a different state and not there and witnessing it firsthand. But they witnessed it all firsthand. They heard the blood curdling scream out of my mouth and my dad carrying me. And like, you just don't forget those things. So that's been very hard for them. But they have without a doubt been my rock. They have been, and it's funny because my dad said it to me. I was like, Dad, I feel like Lily has a dad, but he doesn't do that for her either. And she gets the silent treatment. She gets the stonewalling and the gaslighting. And it's really hard, but she's recognizing it for herself. She'll come home and she'll say, you know, Mommy did this or said that. And I'm like, I hate it for her, you know? And so she's recognizing it for herself. But so my dad told me that, and he said that he was that for me. And so just like thinking about my own daughter, I right now am both a mom and a dad. And yeah, she's got her dad, but there's so much in, like, I would say that our home is our home. It's our home. And Lily said recently, she's called our house, my house, like your house. And as in, I own the home, so it's my house. It's not her house. And then her dad's house. So she doesn't have a house. And I keep saying to her, when she says it, I'm like, our house. Our house. That's our home. So I was telling my dad, I feel like my dad, well, I know for a fact, my mom and dad have been almost second parents to Lily. And they've stepped into that role too. So it's a heavy role. It's something that I think over time, it will lessen. The pain will lessen. And the joy will increase. But we're still in the middle of that. I would say my parents are still in the middle of that. My mom, she was incredible. She was the one who was able to stand face to face with him and tell him what needed to be said. She was not afraid. There would be days that I was afraid, and I would be either running away from him or speeding away in a car. And my mom, who would be in her own car, would drive right up to him in front of him.
That would be me. That would be me.
Yeah, I'm like in the car screaming out the window, Mom, get away from him, he's dangerous. And she's looking at me and she's like, you go on, I'm good.
I got this.
And she's just like got that finger and she's just pointing at him. She's like, how dare you? You need to repent. You need to ask God for forgiveness and you know, all this stuff, whatever. And at one point he actually said that she was the only one who had the guts to stand up to him. He's like, I can respect your mom. She's the only one who has the guts to stand up to me. So, but freedom.
Yes.
Freedom does not come easily. I'm going to go off on topic, but use an example here. I think of Braveheart when I think of freedom. That famous scene when William Wallace asked his army of men, what would you do with your freedom? Will you fight? One of the first texts that my lawyer had sent to me after I retained her, it was along the lines, she said, Makaela, I need you to tell him that you have a lawyer and that you're filing for a divorce. Can you do this? I will never forget that text. Can you do this? Because I was so afraid. Because I couldn't do it. Because I knew, he was pushing hard day in, day out, trying to say, you should take me back. The Bible says that you should forgive me. You should, all this stuff. And he was saying things like, there's no way you're going to make it on my own. You can't make it through life without me. And he was saying things like, I'm the one that broke you. I'm the only one that can fix you. Yeah. And, so my lawyer then is like, can you do this?
Right.
I don't know. I'm afraid. And so finally she was like, Makaela, you need to be able to do this. If you're ready to if you're gonna go through with it, you got to be
Right.
ready to fight. It's going to take a lot. So I said, yes, I can do this. And saying, like, can you do this, was the beginning of the fight of my life. It was not easy. That fight to get free, it was not easy. The soldiers in Braveheart, they replied to William Wallace, fight against that? No, we'll run and we will live. Right? I could have stayed in that marriage.
Right.
Right. He at one point he said, Makaela, you can come back to us. My mom and dad will forgive you. Forgive me. Because I didn't want to take him back, because I made him leave.
Man.
He worked hard on me from every angle for 4 years. He would cry and beg and threaten and scream, and he'd guilt trip me, spiritually guilt trip me, every single form you could think of. I could have stayed in that. I could have said, okay, fine, I'll stay. And I even remember his sister messaged me at one point, and she said, Makaela, you can go back. Just know that I won't ever have anything to do with you again. I just can't have that in my life. I'm putting the boundary up for myself, because in all honesty, she was his first victim. His sister was his first victim of treating that way. And she had said for years, something's wrong with him. Something's off with him. This is not normal. She called it for years, and his dad just ignored it and said she needed to find it in her heart to forgive and move on. And she just couldn't, because it was continuous. Right. And so she put healthy boundaries in, and I remember messaging back. It was a hard decision, and it wasn't a hard decision to stay. I was leaving. Right. I got my lawyer, and I was ready for a divorce. The minute it all came out, I was like, I threw my wedding band up. The minute I found out, I threw my wedding ring into the grass. And because I never wanted, it was just gross. It felt disgusting. Right. So when she messaged that, like, you can go back. And my immediate thought was, I'm not going back. I'm not going back at all. I'm choosing you. I'm choosing me to walk away, and I'm choosing to believe you that what you've said all these years is actually true, because all of this coming out supports everything you said. Right. So anyhow, I could have stayed. Yeah. I've even after, there's been several pastors in town that have told me, oh, I've been praying for you and him, and I'm praying that you'll be able to work it out. And another pastor said, I've been praying for you guys. I didn't want to, this other pastor in town said he had heard initially, but he didn't want to get involved, but he'd been praying for us from the beginning, and he was hoping that we would be able to work it out and get back together. Because as pastors, that's what we should do. Is basically what he said. And I got so disgusted in that moment. And I said, you're asking me to walk back into abuse, and there's no way I will ever do that. Right.
And it's like, I mean, I get that. Like, obviously, like, marriage is worth fighting for and all of this, but like, yeah. But to make that assumption that, because they were clueless. They had no idea. And just assume like that you're in error, or, like, well, you obviously need to get back together because that's what God wants, and all this stuff. Like, I mean, like, okay.
Yeah. So I could have gone back, but the truth is I would have died. It would have either been by his hands, or it would have been a slow death of me losing myself over to that abuse. Okay, so William Wallace then says, I fight and you may die. He says, run and you'll live, at least for a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all of these days from this day to that for one chance? Just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they will never take our freedom. So yeah, I could have stayed, but that was not what God wanted. God does not want us to live in abuse. No. If there is not abuse happening in a marriage and people have made mistakes, then okay, it's okay to talk through that and should sit in counseling and work through those issues. Right. But if there is not abuse, if there is abuse happening, that is not okay. Right. So I lived, God provided so much within my freedom. Like, just thinking about, like, what did God provide for me in the end? And really, I feel like I'm in the middle right now. Right. I have a solid family. I have parents who have stood the gap for me. They have loved me unconditionally. My family, my sister, my brother-in-law, my other brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they're all consistently reminding me of my worth and that I have a future. My sister checks in on me a lot. She shows up. She helps me with the next steps of life. She was talking to me about insurance the other day. I was like, I don't know what to do for my insurance. She just checks in, and she's that big sister. So my friends, I have very few friends. My circle is extremely small, rightfully so. I'm very cautious. They're really good to me. I was at dinner one night recently with one of them, and it's just a normal night.
Right.
She looked at me and she was like, "Buddy, you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." She goes, "You just seem off." And I was like, "Actually, I am a little off." And I just told her what happened that week. It wasn't anything big, just some things that I was just in my mind thinking through. She was like, "Yeah, I could tell something was a little different." And we talk about it. I think the biggest thing is that the people that have come into my life in this season, they've just been really good to let me be and let me heal as I need to in the moments. And there's moments when they're a little bit heavy, they give me the space, or they bring it up.
Right.
Some friends are I have some friends that just look at me and they say, "We're going to talk about this."
Right.
And I bring it up and we talk about it.
Right.
And I feel safe to talk about it in those spaces. So I've just been really blessed with solid friendships. I've gotten to the point where I would never fully open up to somebody again, in fear that what I would share would be used against me, spiritually even. There's times where you feel like, even in a spiritual setting, that it's a danger in the Christian world, because you want to have a safe space, and we as Christians, we want to be Christ-like. We want to, the Bible encourages us to be Christ-like, bear the fruit of the Spirit, but that can become, in a sense, a little hyper spiritual, where we put expectations on other people to live up to those spiritual levels, and we just can't hit it.
Right.
And someone's going through extreme trauma and grief, there's not a timeline for healing.
No.
And there's not a book for it either. There's not a right way to heal.
Right.
You just struggle through healing.
Well, and I think that's a great point. And one of the questions that we didn't get to last time, and we're probably going to wind down soon, but one of the questions that I was going to ask, last time is, what not to do, what did people do to you that you should not do, and then what to do. And I think like you just answered it is, there are people in your life who, are really there, and to make it known frequently that they are there, but never pressure you into fitting a preconceived mold of what they think healing should be.
Yeah.
So you need the freedom and time to heal. And honestly, when I think back on healing from anorexia after dealing with it, not quite as long, not 15 years, but it was a few years. And you need time. But the thing that just resonated so much with me on that was, you need pressureless time, because my parents, whom I love, and they are strong believers, and my dad led me to the Lord. Like, I love my parents. But they never dealt with any kind of eating disorder. Like, they didn't understand it. And, my dad is just very black and white, and he's like, "Well, just go eat a cheeseburger." And I was like, it's not how it works. And so it was just this, but it was this, because they didn't understand, there was always this like pressure of like, well, just eat more. And why aren't you eating more? And just, we know the issue and we know how to fix it, at least on paper. So just, do it. And it's like, well, that's not really how it works. And that's not actually the issue. Like, there are lots of issues underneath that. That's just the symptom and all this. But I do remember God brought my husband, Sean, into my life. And that was one of the most vivid things, because he came into my life at the pit, one of my pits of my life. So I kind of had started the healing process, and really the Lord healed. Obviously the Lord is someone who heals and brings healing and freedom, but I was not there yet. And so the first few years of my marriage was still healing from this eating disorder and control and all this other stuff. But one thing that I admire about Sean and did in the moment, I had the wherewithal by grace to know, he never pressured me. He never asked why I wasn't eating more. He never commented on what I did or did not eat. He never, like, he just was the most pressureless person. And that's not to say he doesn't call me out on stuff, because he does. but it's like he just knew he needed that. I needed that space, and then I needed that space to heal, and I needed it to be without pressure. And so I just completely understand that. So if you're listening now and you are close with someone who is going through trauma or has been going through trauma, and you might be like me, I'm very like, I'm the push friend. I call myself the push friend. I'm like, I feel like you maybe should do this, and maybe this, and just go a little bit further. And I hope it's never with, ill intent. Like, I want people to, grow and be encouraged and all this other stuff. But, just make sure that they know that you're there, that you love them, and that you're praying for them. But give them that space, and opportunities will arise. Again, like you said, one of your friends was like, we need to talk about this, but you're close enough to where you know that, and, you're close enough where you do feel, but I'm sure you would have felt close enough to also say, I will, just give me a minute. And then they would have done that. So oh my goodness, there's so much. And I feel like it's been 2 hours almost. We prepared eight different topics, and we covered 2. So maybe this will be an ongoing series. I don't know. There's so much more that I really just would love to flesh out. But man, I am so thankful for you. I am so thankful, seriously, for your willingness to share this and to walk through this and to process this and to do so in a way, because I know that, and we talked a little bit about before we came on, but there's still some things that are very raw and that you don't really trust yourself to talk about yet, but even in that honesty, like, I admire that so much. And I've just got to say, I've been so blessed by these conversations, and yes, gut punch. And again, all the emotions, but to know that so when you first wrote that first post, and I remember, where I was and all this other stuff, I knew even then that you were holding on. And I knew even then that this was going to be a powerful story that God was going to use to do who knows what, but like way more than I could ever comprehend or imagine. And so I am just so thankful for you, so thankful for your willingness to come on, so thankful for your willingness to share. I really would like to continue this series. We'll just make it a series. I've never done a guest series before, but I am like all for it, because honestly, so just to give you guys a heads up, like, we talked about confidence and freedom, but we had simplicity, like the simplicity of how sweet God was every step in the way. We had God's sovereignty and provision. We had what we see and what you could see in the moment and couldn't see in the moment. We had perseverance. We had the churches in Christ. We had dependence. Oh my word. We had so much. So, we probably should finish this one, but man, yeah. I am overwhelmed by him, and just, again, so thankful for you. Truly.
Well, thank you. I'll leave it with this. God is never going to let us down.
Yep.
There are moments when he's quiet, and we wonder where he's at. We wonder what he's doing. We wonder if he cares. We wonder if anybody cares. But the truth is, God does not leave us nor forsake us.
No.
And he does care about us. He does see us and meet us where we are, and he does speak to us. And that is the ultimate truth. And I think I know that the biggest thing that got me through it all, through every bit of it, was to remember truth. What is truth? That same woman that came to my house, the counselor, that was one of the things she texted me shortly after she had gone back home. She said, "Oh my gosh, it just hit me. I felt like the Lord, I'm supposed to tell you this. You need to know truth." And I wrote down every verse in the Bible that had to do with truth. I'm like, I guess I have to memorize scripture. That wasn't it. That was good. It was a good foundation, because I was like, okay, how do I apply the scripture to myself? Because I don't know what it means. So it really helped me in the long run. But in the end, in the long, long run, it was, you have to know truth, and you got to know what God's voice, so that when those tumultuous times come, when the tribulations come, you will in fact know the voice of God, and you will be reminded of what truth is versus what you're facing and what you're seeing. So I just want to leave it with that God does not leave us nor forsake us, and then he's never going to let us down.
Absolutely. I love that. And I actually had marked one of the verses, or little passages, was Ephesians 3:11-13. And it says, quote, "This was in accordance with the eternal purpose which he carried out in Christ Jesus, our Lord, in whom we have boldness and confident access through faith in him. Therefore, I ask you not to lose heart. And my tribulations on your behalf are there for your glory." So obviously Paul is talking about what he's going through, and the church was burdened for him and all of this other stuff. But I can just hear your voice there too, how you have persevered through it. And I just love, and I always have loved, your love for truth. And obviously, like, I am all about biblical literacy. I am all about truth and the word. And so that like makes my heart beat a million times faster just because of that. But it's so true, because that's literally our only anchor in this life. And I truly have no idea how people without Jesus survive. I really don't. I don't know, but God has given us truth, and he's given it to us in a tangible form. And he didn't have to do that. And so it's just so, I love how hearing you say that, and how that is your parting word. It just like, remember truth, because honestly, we get so in trouble when we don't remember it, right? Like we've known it in the past, and we just kind of like let it sit over here, but we're not actively remembering it. We're not actively meditating on it. We're not actively seeping ourselves in it, because we're letting the lies in this world consume us. And again, in some situations, that's just immensely difficult to hold on to truth, especially when you've been told you're being crazy for believing truth. But I love that. I just love how we're on the same page.
Isn't that great? I love it.
Oh, it really is. So, okay, well, friends, thank you so much again for listening. I am confident that you are basking and soaking in the goodness that is the Lord right now, even in the heaviness, and even in the ugliness, and even in the hard circumstances that we go through. Hearing just God's power and vibrancy and life and provision and revelation of truth in the midst of that kind of valley is beyond powerful. And that's, I mean, holy moly, like reason enough, like to believe that he is there and he loves you. And that's what I encourage you to do. And that's what I'm encouraging myself to do, is to just bask in his faithfulness, bask in his strength and his mercy and his kindness and its peace. It's not always easy to do, but he is all of those things, and he wants to be all of those things for us. We are never promised a cushy life, actually. We are promised the opposite. No cushy. We are promised the opposite. In this world, you will have tribulation, you will have trials, but he has overcome the world. And I am so thankful for that. And again, we're going to have to keep going with this. I feel like I'm totally putting you on the spot, but I told Makaela way back in the day, I'm like, I feel like a book should be coming. See, I'm the push friend. But
you should just write that book with me.
There you go. I'm for it. Well,
we got all the info on this podcast here.
Yes, exactly. And we'll just keep feeding the fire. I love it. We'll just keep feeding it. Okay, my friend. Well, again, thank you so much. Thank you for that parting word. And is there anything else that's popping into your mind before we end?
No, I'm going to leave it right there. When God says you're done, you're done.
All right. I love it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Makaela, and we will talk again soon.
Okay. I love that.
All right. Bye, friend.
Bye.